It's always the novels considered to be the greatest of all time that come wrapped in racism and handed to us as canon. And I'm talking about John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Whenever I do review videos without really writing down my thoughts and I just go at it, I get so passionate about things that what I need to say that is very crucial to say does not come across. I acted like I was back in uni and I wrote a literary analysis and really dug into the structure and writing of this book. And I did so that way I can narrow it down and make a video here on this platform that was to the point and concise and encompassed everything that I thought crucial to say about this work. We'll get into it. When I tried to bring up this discussion, there was a creator on this platform that told me that I was in the minority for not liking this book. The minority, mind you, of a majority of people who like the book being white men and women interpreting it through a white lens. In response, I did not attack. I invited him to a conversation, and we've had thoughtful exchanges before. I genuinely believed that he'd be receptive when I brought up the racism in East of Eden, especially because he highlights BIPOC authors and claims to care about marginalized voices. But the moment this conversation challenged his literary comfort, he disengaged. So he chose not to respond, and for me, that's dismissal. And for those of us who live at the intersection of these identities, that silence is loud. East of Eden is often revered as a masterwork of American literature. It's a generational saga meant to encapsulate the moral tension between good and evil. You start finding patterns in Steinbeck's writing, and this is coming from someone who has read his stuff from high school and to university. He is a man who postures as socially conscious, but also uses his literary platform to reinforce racial hierarchies under the guise of realism, ultimately revealing the limits of his so-called empathy. When it comes to class struggle, to a certain degree, Steinbeck shows up. When it comes to white poverty, disillusionment, the failures of masculinity, he shows up. But when it comes to race in America, he fails miserably. Let's talk about what's actually on the page in East of Eden. There's, in part 1, chapter 1, page 6, that early on in the book, Steinbeck describes Native Americans as an inferior breed without energy, inventiveness, or culture, a people that lived on grubs and grasshoppers and shellfish, too lazy to hunt or fish. They ate what they could pick up and planted nothing, essentially describing them as directionless and faded from the land as he goes into the Spaniards colonizing. He writes it as if genocide were a natural process. The next piece comes from Chapter 15, pages 160 through 164. It is dialogue between Lee and Sam in this version of the book. Now, Lee is a Chinese American servant who is arguably the most progressive element in the book when it comes to racial representation. Steinbeck tries to subvert the stereotype of the subservient Asian man, allowing Lee to reveal himself as intelligent, philosophical, and self-aware beneath his manufactured accent. Now, I believe that this could have been a powerful critique of white perception, could have, but instead, Lee's performance of a pidgin accent for the comfort of white people and then his eventual unmasking feels less like liberation and more like Steinbeck saying, look how clever I am. Look how clever I am to know this, right? The problem lies in the fact that Steinbeck is claiming to be aware within his writing through his character Sam, which implies that he is aware as an author and a person outside of his narrative. In chapters 18 and 19, pages 211 and 218, comes another inexcusable moment where Steinbeck uses a racial slur to describe a Black character, not just through the dialogue of a character, but also in the narration, Steinbeck's own voice. It isn't part of some meaningful interrogation of racism. There is no literary justification here, no complex racial dynamics being exposed. It's the author exercising his power, letting the slur casually fall into the text like it's nothing. It's not about realism. It's not a critique of racism. It's just there, used casually, as if her dehumanization doesn't matter, because to Steinbeck, it doesn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a blind spot. This was a choice. He can write Lee with enough nuance to explain the dangers of white perception, but he chooses to describe a Black character with a slur because she exists outside of his sphere of interest and therefore outside of his care. This is where separating the art from the artist, that whole argument collapses, because the artist is in the art, not just behind the scenes, but actively editorializing, moralizing, narrating. When he uses a slur, it's not the time period or the character's flaw, it's him. If he can philosophize for 600 pages about good and evil, he can't pretend that slurs and stereotypes are just a product of the times. He wrote them. He chose them. They reflect his ethics. And those are just 3 parts in this book. But throughout this book is littered with slur after slur and moments like that through the whole book. East of Eden is obsessed with inheritance, the sins of the father, the cynical nature of violence and moral failure. But what Steinbeck fails to interrogate is whiteness itself as inheritance. Especially within the literary canon, he writes white men as tortured souls capable of redemption. Everyone else is flat. His view of women is no better. Kathy with zero nuance or trauma to explain her choices. She exists not as a warning, but as a misogynistic fever dream. What happens when a woman wants power and autonomy? The only good women in this book are either dead or submissive. Again, not a flaw in a character, but a flaw in the author. And some people may argue that Kathy does have trauma after there's a part where she goes through some violence, but the thing that propels her character to that point, there's no substance. According to Stanford and the American Studies Association, Steinbeck was considered progressive. Let's stop pretending. It's time we stop excusing the illusion of historical accuracy or context, because he was progressive enough to know better, and we see that within the dialogue of Lee and Sam, between Lee and Sam, and he just chose not to be better. That is not literary complexity. That's weakness. And if you're someone who claims to uplift marginalized voices, you don't get to shut us down when we critique the white canon. You don't get to wave the diversity flag in one video, then ignore the harm in another just because the author is revered or his work is considered a classic. That's not integrity. That's selective listening. That's performance, which I've also talked about in another video. If this is what the canon calls great, then it's not just the book that we need to rethink, it's the canon itself, which is a huge discussion, especially in universities. I'm not sure, I can't speak for all the universities, but the one I went to, we were a very diverse student body full of marginalized groups and BIPOC people. This debate was actually very prevalent in my university. But if you cannot understand how upholding this kind of work harms racially marginalized communities, then you honestly don't need another classic. You need a class in critical thinking.